So welcome back, and congratulations once again for making your first Android app in the last section, and I hope you're looking forward to learning about Java in more detail. So Java is quite an old language created by Sun Microsystems, now Oracle, in 1995, but it's still very much in active use today, not only in Android applications, but learning Java will allow you to make server-based applications as well as desktop applications for both Windows and Mac. Minecraft, for example, was written in Java, as well as a number of business applications that are used very widely around the world. So learning it not only will allow you to make Android apps, but open up a number of different avenues for you as well. It's also what's known as an object-oriented language, which will allow you to learn that type of language as well. So it's a really worthwhile language to learn. Now, you'll notice here that I'm in my browser. I'm not in Android Studio, and that's where we're going to be spending the most of our time in this section. Mostly because every time I want to run a bit of code and show you what it does, I don't want to have to compile an Android app and wait for it to display on the phone. So I've chosen browxy.com. So go there on your computer now, and you should see pretty much exactly this page. If by any chance this website isn't available by the time you're watching this course, there are a number of other Java compilers out there. And indeed, if you don't like the one that I've chose, then feel free to just Google online Java compiler and you'll find a bunch that you can use there. They all do basically the same thing, but I'll show you just a few reasons why I think this one is worth using. Firstly, you've got the nice code view and output view, which is what you're generally going to want when you're doing some code. But also you've got the ability to save and share your code. So before we even write any applications, let's register for the website. So just fill in your details here. I'm going to use rob@robpercival.co.uk. Put in an alias. So this is what will appear on your account. So I'll just call myself Rob Percival, and then I'm going to use LastPass to generate a password. There we go. Obviously you can just type one in there if you like. We'll accept the terms and conditions and then enter the captcha. Okay, there we go. So I just need to confirm my email address. You don't need to see me doing that, so I've just done that. And now I'm going to click continue. And there we go. So now I'm logged in, and now I can save all my programs. So that's going to be a really useful thing for you to be able to do as you go along. Each program you make, you can save and then go back and view it and edit it later. And useful for both of us is when you have any problems that you can't figure out, then you can just share your saved program by clicking Get URL here. So if I just put some text in there, for example, and then click Get URL, then I'm given a URL which I can share. So if you want to post something in the forums, then you can post it using that URL, and then we'll all be able to see and run your code and try and tell you what's wrong. So that's a really useful feature, and that's why I've chosen to use this site to practice our Java. All right, but enough introduction. Let's get straight in and create our Hello World app. Now, another handy feature of this Java editor is that we've got a number of kind of templates of code that we can look at and just import straight away. So I'm going to import Hello World. There we go. So let's just get rid of the untitled there. Now, some of these keywords and structures will be reasonably familiar to you as we used them in the last section. But now, as I said previously, we're going to look at them in much more detail. So first of all, let's just click Start up here to see what this does. You might be able to guess. It prints Hello World to the console. As you can kind of guess, that line might achieve for you. So what's going on here? Why is this set up like it is? It's not just simple print to the console line. We've got a load of other code as well. So let's take it step by step. So this first line here, it creates a class called Hello World, and that class is public. We actually don't need that word public there. If I get rid of that and then run it again, everything works fine, but it's conventional to put it in, and it just defines the access level of this class. So the class can be accessed from anywhere in our app. which doesn't really make much sense when we've only got such a tiny page here. But if you imagine you have a load of scripts and a load of different places in your app, you might want to keep some areas of it hidden from others, essentially. So what's a class, you might be asking? Well, it's one of the things that will become much clearer as the course goes on, but to give you a brief introduction, a class is like a template, or what's known as an object. So my usual way of explaining this is to think about in terms of computer games. So let's say you've got a computer game that has some ghost characters in it. What you might want to do with these ghost characters is create a class called Ghost. And then within that class, you have a load of code that defines a ghost. So it might define how much it damages the character when the character comes into contact with the ghost. It might define how the ghost moves around the screen. It might define an image that matches what the ghost looks like. Essentially, it's a template to create a ghost. Then, later on in your code, whenever you want to create a ghost, you can do that using this class. And that's all we're doing, really. We're defining a type of object. And that's the basis of object-oriented programming, which is what we're doing when we work with Java. So just to recap that, a class is a template to create a certain type of object. For example, a character or a ghost in a computer game. So what are we doing here then? Well, here we're really just creating a class because we have to. Any Java program has to start with a class definition. So if, for example, I try and remove that code and then run it, the provided class name is invalid because there isn't one, essentially. So I'm going to Command Z to get back to where we were. You can use Control Z, of course, to undo anything that you do on Windows as well. So essentially, that is where you need to start whenever you're making a Java program. You need to define a class and call it whatever you like, and then you have some curly brackets, and that's where your code for that class is going to go. Okay, so then we have our other bit of boilerplate code, which is this line here, which is something that we've seen a little of. We haven't worked with this particular method. So this is the main method. And a method, by the way, is just a function by another name. So when we're working in object-oriented programming, we talk about methods rather than functions. And they are just chunks of code that do something, like display hello world, for example. So don't be afraid of the word method. It just means a chunk of code that does something. So every Java program, again, has to have a main method. And essentially, that method is what is going to run when the Java program is executed. And we've got a few keywords here, two of which we're familiar with, one we're not. So public, again, just means that this main method is going to be accessible from anywhere in our program. Void, we've seen before, means that the main method won't return anything. So just to remind you, you might have a function that doubles a number for some reason, and that function will then return something. So if you send the number 4 to it, it will return the number 8. If you send the number 10, it'll return the number 20. But this method is not returning anything, so we put void there. And the new keyword that we haven't seen before is static, and that's slightly tricky to define, so I'm just going to quickly go back to my ghost example. So let's say we have our ghost class. So when I create a ghost, that ghost is alive, presumably, but if it gets killed by the character, then it will become dead. So I might have a variable that says whether this ghost is alive or dead. And that variable would be specific to each ghost that I create. So that's known as an instance. So each instance of the ghost class, whenever I create a ghost, that will have its own property of whether it's alive or dead. But also, I might have the damage rating of a ghost, which might be the amount of life that the character loses when it comes into contact with a ghost. And I might want that to be fixed for all ghosts for all time, as long as this game is being run. So if that was the case, I would want that variable to be static. So that's what this static means. Essentially, it's related to the ghost class rather than each instance of the ghost, each specific ghost. So I hope that made sense. If not, if it didn't quite, then go back and listen to it again, or have a quick Google and just Google what does static mean in Java. That's another reason to learn Java, by the way, because it's a very well-established language. Almost every question you could possibly imagine has already been asked and answered online, probably several times. So there's loads of information out there when you Google it. So that's what our static keyword means here. But really, you don't need to fully understand what's going on there. The main point is that every Java program needs a main method, and that needs to be defined like this. Okay, so now we're just looking at this part. So this is the variables that are going to be passed to the main method. And those, in this case, are an array of strings. Now, don't worry too much about what an array is. We're going to look at that in a few videos' time. But the name of the variable is called args, and that can be changed. We could change it to arguments. That would be fine, and if we run that, it would still work without any problems, but the convention is to call it args. And essentially, the args are some particular values that you might want to set when you run the program. So I might want to tell the program my name, for example, and I would send it the name Rob. I might want to tell it my age, and I'd pop in 34. So that's not relevant to us at all as Android developers. We're not going to be manually setting args when we run our apps, but it is part of Java, so it's good to be aware of what it's doing. All right, we're nearly there. So hopefully more or less understand what that line is doing now. The basic summary is that this is the line that defines the method or chunk of code that runs when the program itself is run. And then this last line then is something completely new, but it's fairly straightforward, I hope. So we're using a system function here, and then we're outputting something. So we use system.out and then .print line. And the line that we want to print is hello world, which we put in double quotes there and in parentheses as well. And then every line in Java doesn't have a curly bracket, will have a semicolon to show that that line has been completed. All right, so it's fairly trivial, of course, to change that from hello world to hello Rob. Just change the code there. Fantastic. Right, so that's our introduction to how a Java program is laid out and what the basic lines are doing. The challenge in this video is to essentially recreate this from scratch. So stare at it and try and remember it in as much detail as you can, and then essentially just try and get rid of the whole thing and rewrite it. Maybe make it a little bit interesting, put something else here rather than hello world or hello Rob or whatever. But basically just try and remember this and write it out from scratch. Preferably telling yourself what each keyword is doing as you're writing it. Good luck. All right, I hope you managed that. I'm just going to take this through from scratch quite quickly. So our first step is to create a public class, mostly because every Java app needs a class, and that by default, the class is normally defined to be public, so it's accessible anywhere within our app. And this time I'm going to call this Hi Rob, just to change it up a little bit. And then we'll have our curly brackets to contain the code for that class. And then we're going to define the main method, which is the chunk of code that's going to be run when the app itself is run, or the program is run. And this is going to be public, again, so accessible from anywhere in the app. It's going to be static, because we want it to be related to the class rather than any specific instance of the class. That doesn't really make sense in this class because we're not actually creating any instances of it, so don't really worry about what that's doing here. The main thing is that we need to put the word static in when we define the main method. And then void, because it doesn't return anything, and then we're going to call the method main, and the method is going to accept an array of strings like that, and that array of strings is going to be called args, and that's it. And then once again we'll have some curly brackets to contain our inside code, and then finally we want to write the code to display the words "Hi Rob" in the console, and we do that by accessing the system functions or system methods, and we want the set of output methods within that, so system.out, and then we want to print a line, so print ln, and the line that we want to print is "Hi Rob," and we contain that in double quotes, and we contain the double quotes in parentheses, and then a semicolon at the end of the line. Fantastic. So let's just run that, and it works fine. Brilliant. So fairly straightforward. All we're doing is rewriting what we saw before, but hopefully that helped clarify in your mind what each bit of this code is doing. So I'm just going to save this program. So I'll call it Hello World. Okay. And then you can see that if you do that as well, it's saved there, and then you can edit it and publish it as well. And in the next lecture, you'll see a link to this code. So you'll be able to view code for each of these lectures and run it and edit it and test it for yourself. Not that you'll need to, of course, because you will have written it out yourself anyway as part of the challenges and as you're working your way through the videos. Great. So that's our Hello World Java program completed. In the next video, we'll see in more detail how to create and work with variables in Java. See you there.